after the successful release of Pirates of the Caribbean, which also garnered an Oscar nomination for Johnny Depp for his role as Captain Jack Sparrow, the world seemed ready for a sequel for Pirates of the Caribbean. But was Disney ready for a sequel? At the time, they never really planned for a sequel for this franchise, but as soon as the box office numbers came in, the critical and audience reception, even the Oscar nomination, they were all willing to go full out and willing to do a sequel. So what did they do? They planned 2 sequels and filmed them back to back, which can be a problem at times for certain Hollywood blockbusters where they'll film one movie and then continue with another, and there will be some sort of continuity issues. But the screenwriters for Dead Man's Chest were willing to make a full arc for the characters that were established in the first movie. So, does Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest hold up? Well, let's talk about the story. The story follows the events of the first movie. It follows Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann on their wedding day, which just so happens to be ruined by the East India Trading Company led by Lord Cutler Beckett, who is set out to arrest Will and Elizabeth Turner because they were involved with Captain Jack Sparrow, who is indeed a criminal to the eyes of the East India Trading Company. But it's through the recruitment of Will Turner that he learns that Cutler Beckett wants Jack's compass. For what reason? It's not really established, but I'm not really going to tell you anything. He does want something, not going to tell you what it is. But he sets out to find Captain Jack Sparrow, who at the same time is being haunted by the ghosts of his past. When Bootstrap Bill Turner visits him on the Flying Dutchman, he presents this sort of ultimatum about his curse. 13 years he has been a captain, Jack Sparrow has, and it is now time to pay the devil's due. Davy Jones had apparently also given Captain Jack Sparrow the captain's life for 13 years, and it's been 13 years, so it's time to pay the piper. And so he's presented with the Black Spot, a sort of curse, if you will, or a sign of mutiny in the pirate community. But in this version, it's meant as a tracker form of things for the Kraken and the Flying Dutchman. And it is off to the races as both sides of the argument are trying to get to the same thing, the Dead Man's Chest. What I can certainly say about this sequel is that although it has a lot of expectations, certainly from the first one, it doesn't fully live up to those expectations. But for the one thing that I could equate this movie to is that this is an Empire Strikes Back situation. You have a movie that is kind of the in-between of a full arc. It has a character that is established, but is going this movie's ending definitely feels like an Empire Strikes Back situation. All hope is lost. The Pearl is gone. Jack Sparrow is gone. And that could equate to, the Han Solo being put in carbonite. It's a very Empire Strikes Back type of film. And at the time of Empire Strikes Back, critics were not very happy with it. And certainly, when this movie came out, critics were not necessarily happy with it. I think that this film actually accomplishes what it needs to do. It raises the stakes. It gives more of a character arc to every single character established in the new movie, or established in the first movie, and it continues the story in a nice, organic way. Now, I want to go into the major positives of this film that I think are really good. First of all, let's get back to the Black Spot. In pirate lore, the Black Spot is meant to be a sign of mutiny to the captain. If the captain had not been doing anything well for the crew, essentially he'd be presented the Black Spot, and it would be a sign of mutiny. In this version, I really like what they did. It's essentially like a tracking mark or a blood meter. You know how certain predators would track like blood or hormones. The Black Spot kind of acts like that for the Flying Dutchman and the Kraken. It's actually nice. It's a nice little organic take on the Black Spot mythos that associates with the pirate community. Another thing that I really like about this movie is the Flying Dutchman design. In every single movie that I've seen in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, they always have a unique ship that is given to the antagonist. Take, for example, the first movie. The first movie is essentially a skeleton crew that is operating the Black Pearl. Very sleek design, a very jet black design with holes in the sails. The Flying Dutchman is a very oceanic, organic looking ship, even to the way it's presented in the movie as it emerges from the water like a sea beast. It really does fit that aesthetic, especially for the pirate crew, who is part of this oceanic theme, having barnacles and crustaceans everywhere. Having the ship having more of an oceanic feel gives it a very unique look, and it's very, very awesome. And when we get to the Queen Anne's Revenge, which is in the fourth Pirates film, I'll discuss a bit more on how aesthetics can actually help the villain itself. Now, as the story progresses, there is some continuity errors in this one, but overall, I do think that this film is actually pretty worth it. It's a nice sequel that really bridges the gap between the first and the second, and it'll lead right into the third. Now, as I mentioned before, this movie was shot alongside, back-to-back, with Pirates of the Caribbean 3. And there have been blockbusters who have been shot back-to-back before. Mockingjay was one, and now we're getting Avengers Infinity War, which is being shot back-to-back with Avengers 3 and Avengers 4. And when we get to Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End next week, I'll discuss how sometimes shooting things back-to-back doesn't necessarily make it a good idea to do so. As far as the characters go, they do add some new arcs to certain characters that I feel actually works with some of the characters. Governor Norrington is kind of the Lando Calrissian of the entire group, because essentially he backstabs everyone at the end of the movie by presenting to Lord Cutler Beckett the heart of Davy Jones, who, if you don't know, is the ruler of the ocean. He controls the Davy Jones locker, which is kind of a sort of ethereal plane. I'll get more into that once we get into the third movie of the franchise next week. And if you control the heart, you control essentially the sea and everyone that lives or dies. It's kind of awesome in a way. It's kind of a weird sort of thing. Elizabeth Swann is kind of the Princess Leia, but she becomes more of a badass towards the third movie, and I'll get into that. This is sort of like, if a character arc starts in the first movie, this is kind of the height of all the characters, and the third movie is just full resolution of every single character. And when we get to next week, I'll explain how their character arcs end. And as I said before, Captain Jack Sparrow is like the Han Solo of this movie. He essentially, at the end of the film, he sacrifices himself. Well, not really sacrifices himself. He gets chained to the Black Pearl by Elizabeth Swann, but he decides instead to fight the Kraken as the ship goes down. And that's a very noble thing for him to do, especially for a character that is a bit selfish and a bit naive. But overall, I do think that his character actually works. And when I first saw this movie in the theaters, I was crying because Captain Jack Sparrow was one of my favorite characters growing up. And to see him die in front of my eyes, I mean, granted, he didn't necessarily die. He was going to come back in the third movie. But at the time, as a kid watching this, I got emotional. It was one of my favorite characters, and I didn't want to see him die. It's like if you saw Spider-Man die or Batman die. You just don't want to see that happen to your favorite heroes. And granted, while Johnny Depp or Captain Jack Sparrow, isn't a likable hero, he's more of a selfish hero, he does deserve better. But I do like this movie. I do think it's the Empire Strikes Back of the Pirates of the Caribbean films. Is it as good as the first one? Not necessarily. There is some pacing issues I have, and it could have been cut down by 15 minutes, but it does present some nice set pieces, especially the watermill sequence with the giant wheel and people fighting on it. That's probably one of my favorite action sequences of the entire Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. It's well choreographed, well paced, well in time, and it was really great. And let's not forget to mention the music of this film. The music here is really, really good, and it builds some more levity towards the climax of the film. It's a well-rounded film, but it does have some few problems in its pacing and some character moments. But other than that, I think this is a perfectly suitable sequel. And let's hope that the third movie lives up to expectations. So, without further ado, I'm going to give Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest a 9 out of 10. Thank you guys so much for watching my Pirates of the Caribbean reviews. Next week is At World's End, and we'll continue doing Pirates of the Caribbean month. And at the end of the month, we'll be doing the Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. So, yo ho ho, and a pirate's life for me. My name has been Nicholas Jennings, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.